Alrighty. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TaxBandits webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar is titled Year-End Tax Business Filings. We hope that everyone enjoyed their holiday season. We're excited to be back in the tax season once again. My name is Jaricel, and I'm here with my colleague Andrew, and we're presenting on behalf of TaxBandits, a third-party e-file provider specializing in business tax compliance. We say all of this just because while we have years and years of experience, we are not tax preparers. So for any specific questions, please do consult the IRS or contact your local tax professional for further guidance. Now, if you joined our first webinar, Vendor Payments and How to Stay Compliant, you'll remember that we reviewed the differences between employees and vendors and how to report vendor payments by filing a 1099 miscellaneous form. Today, we will be covering 1099 forms again, but we will also discuss W-2s, ACA forms, and a couple of others as well. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started and as people start rolling in. But before we do, if anyone has any questions at any point in the presentation, please feel free to chat in the box to the right of your screen, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so for today, we will be covering the following. We're going to start with the 1099 forms. And there are a few different 1099 forms with recipient deadlines on the January 31st, such as the 1099 interest, the dividend, the R, and the miscellaneous. But today we will focus primarily on the 1099 miscellaneous as it is the most common. Then we will go ahead on over to covering those W-2s. We will discuss the 941 quarterly and the 940 annual form. I did want to still briefly go over the ACA forms. I do know that the distribution deadline has been extended from January 31st to March 2nd, so I know that a lot of our employers are rejoicing over that, but I still wanted to give you a little brief synopsis on what all that entails. And then we'll end the discussion with covering the 8809 extension as well as the W-9 forms. And the goal of this webinar is to really highlight who is responsible for filing these forms, who needs to receive them, and review the newer rules about certain returns. So we'll go ahead and start off with the most common forms, the 1099 and the W-2 forms. So if you're a business and you have paid a non-employee $600 or more for services provided during the year, then you need to provide them a 1099 miscellaneous form. So on the contrary, if you're a business and you have employees that you have paid $600 or more to, then you will need to complete and file a Form W-2 for each of your employees. So as a review from our last webinar, there are 3 factors to determine whether an individual is an employee or not. The first being behavior control, which basically means if a worker dictates how the job is done and does not rely on supplies and training from the payer, then they're most likely an independent contractor or a vendor. For example, most likely your plumber won't be asking you to borrow your wrench. Other factors that we have to keep in mind are considering the financial control as well as the relationship between the business and the vendor. Here we've gone ahead and listed the information needed to file a 1099 miscellaneous form, starting off with the payer's information. So that includes the name, EIN or Social Security, address, contact name, and phone number. We'll also have the recipient's information, so that's the name, EIN, or Social Security number, as well as the address, the total amount of non-employee compensation that you're reporting federally, and any amount of money reported on the form that is subject to state tax. So it is important for you to note that when we're determining your federal amounts, you must make sure that you are including non-employee compensation, such as fees, commissions, and awards for any of the services performed by a vendor. So now that we know exactly what you need to report your vendor payments, you can focus on reporting your wages to your employees. So when you're reporting your W-2s, you will need to have the following information. You will need, again, the employer's details, that's the name, EIN, address. You will also need the employer code as well as the employer type. You will need the employee's information, name, Social Security, address, and contact information, as well as the total amount of federal income and federal tax withheld, and any state income tax or state tax withheld. So now at this point, hopefully you have everything that you need to make sure that your forms are filed correctly or filled out correctly. So now the next thing you need to conquer is who exactly are we sending this to? So the copy A will be filed and sent directly to the IRS, while the copy 1 goes into the State Department when and if applicable. Copies B and C are what you're sending to your recipients, and copy C is kept for the payer records. So that's all of the forms that are involved, or the different copies that are involved with the 1089 miscellaneous form. Similarly to the 1099s, we also have the W-2. So when filing those W-2s, copy A will be filed and sent directly to the Social Security Administration, while copy 1 will go to the State Department, again, when applicable. And then the W-2s, when talking about the W-2s, you'll actually need to have copies B, C, and number 2 to go to the employee. And then copy D serves as your employer record. So whether you decide to electronically file your forms with a provider such as us, or TaxBandits, or choose to paper file, really the most important thing is to meet those deadlines so that you can avoid those penalties. So now I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the PATH Act, otherwise known as the Protecting Americans from Tax Heist Act. It really made a grand impact in tax law. It was enacted by our former president, Barack Obama, at the end of 2015, and it led to a lot of changes, the first being providing a new deadline change for businesses to remember when it comes to the 1089 miscellaneous and the W-2 forms. So now, whether you are e-filing or paper filing, W-2 forms and 1089 miscellaneous forms, of course, those that are reporting non-employee compensation, are due to be filed with the IRS and SSA, as well as be distributed to the recipients by January 31st. So this is a huge change because the deadline used to be March 31st for electronic filers. And so last year was the first season with this new change, and unfortunately it led to many filers failing to meet that deadline and unfortunately paying the price for it. So it's also led to a lot of major restrictions when it comes to the Form 8809. The Form 8809 is the application for extension of time to file information return. Now you can no longer request an automatic extension when filing your W-2s. Instead, you must now paper file an 8809 directly with the IRS, detailing the reason for requesting the extension for your W-2s. And again, even then, it's not a guaranteed extension. But thankfully, for other forms such as your 1089, 1098, your 3921s and 3922s, 1084s and 1085, as well as the 5498, you can still e-file the 8809, and all of these forms can be e-filed, which is a huge time saver. And we also have to take care of extensions as well, so do keep that in mind if considering filing with TaxBandits. So now we'll go ahead and step away from the 1089s and W-2 world and transition into ACA filing. So ACA, or Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, was signed into law back in 2010. And it declared that no one could be denied health insurance due to pre-existing conditions. Whether you were male or female, they paid all the same rates for the same services. It went on to say that if an employer employs more than 50 full-time equivalent workers, they must offer affordable health insurance to those workers. And it's important to note that the IRS defines full-time as under the ACA law as 30 hours a week. So that's a little bit different than our traditional 40 hours a week, but under the ACA, full-time is considered 30 hours a week. So there are two different sets of ACA forms that can be filed through TaxBandits. Again, there are more. We have the A series and as well as the B series. But we handle primarily the B series, and that's where we'll go ahead and start off. The B series consists of the 1094B and 1095B. The 1094B is the transmittal form that acts as a cover page for the 1095B form. It's meant to serve as a high-level summary of the findings from the 1095B form, while the 1095B is filed by self-insurers and companies that are not considered ALEs, so they're not considered applicable large employers. So definitely the B series is not as common as the C series, but it still serves as an important informational return. And I did want to go ahead and take this second to share some of the ACA deadlines, especially since they no longer fall on January 31st. The first being the paper filing deadline is February 28th, and now the e-filing or the distribution deadline is March 2nd, and the e-filing deadline is April 2nd. Again, it typically falls on March 31st, but thankfully, March 31st falls on a weekend this year, so the IRS was kind enough to extend it to the next business day. So now let's go ahead and move on to the C series, and this is, again, a pretty big one, but similar to the 1094B and the 1095, I'm sorry, and the 1095 C, sorry, similar to the 1094B, I'm getting myself all confused. The 1094C serves as the cover page for the 1095C forms, except this cover page is a little bit more extensive. So the 1094C cover page includes employer information, contact person details, monthly employee count, total number of employees, total number of 1094C forms being sent out, as well as aggregate group member information. And all that doesn't even cover everything that is on the 1094C. The list does go on, but once you've gathered all that information needed for the 1094C, ALEs must also file the 1095C for each of their employees. And again, to define an ALE is an applicable large employer, and that is any company or organization that has an average of at least 50 full-time employees, or again, full-time equivalents, meaning that they make that 30-hour-a-week mark. Now, I do want to go ahead and hand it off to my colleague, Andrew, who will discuss a little bit about W-9 and the different employer federal tax returns that we have. Andrew?
Thank you, Jarisol. So, stepping away from talking about all the ACA filings, I wanted to mention the importance of a W-9. Businesses use the IRS Form W-9 to request for a taxpayer identification number and certification to get information from vendors they hire as independent contractors. The W-9 offers employers essential information such as the name, address, Social Security or tax identification number needed to complete your 1099 miscellaneous. Employers can actually send W-9 forms to their independent contractors for free using our TaxBandits website. Moving along to the 940 series, we will begin discussing the 941. Employers will use this form to report income taxes, Social Security tax, or Medicare tax withheld from employees' paychecks and pay the employer's portion of Social Security or Medicare tax. A few things you want to have ready when you begin filing is the employer's name, EIN, and address, and then employee details or employment details including employee count, Medicare tax and Social Security, deposits made to the IRS, and tax liability, which can be monthly or semi-weekly. The Form 941 is filed quarterly each year with due dates on April 30th, July 31st, October 31st, and the deadline coming up January 31st. Sticking along with the 940 series, we also include the Form 940. It is also an annual tax return, and the federal unemployment tax return is used to report your FUTA tax. When filing your 940, remember that only employers pay this FUTA tax and is not collected or deducted from your employees' wages. Required information to file the 940 include the business name and EIN, total payments to all employees, adjustments for state exclusions, if applicable, FUTA tax and balance due or overpayment, FUTA liabilities per quarter, and FUTA liability deposits. The deadline for the 940 is January 31st, or if you've made all your deposits in full on time, it is February 10th. Again, just to reiterate all the tax forms we've discussed today, here's a little deadline of dates to keep in mind. On January 31st, the forms due are the W-2s, 1099s to the recipient, the 941 fourth quarter filing, as well as the 940 filing. On February 28th, you'll have the ACA paper filing deadline, as well as the paper filing for the 1099 forms. March 2nd is the ACA recipient deadline due date. And then April 2nd is the ACA e-filing deadline, as well as the 1099 e-filing deadline. I'll hand it back over to Jaroslav.
Thanks, Andrew. So with all these deadlines in mind, I did want to go ahead and make sure that your filing process is as quick and seamless as possible. So while we might be a bit biased, I wanted to share with you a little bit of the benefits of e-filing versus paper filing. When you e-file, you are able to avoid the hassle, first and foremost, of obtaining your own transmitter control code, otherwise known as your TCC. You're also able to take advantage of a lot of our automatic error checks. We eliminate a lot of the human error involved in, paper filing. We save time and energy, as well as you no longer have a need to go ahead and order those scannable forms. You'll receive automatic alerts on the status of your filing, as well as letting you know the moment that it's distributed. And speaking of distribution, if you decide to e-file with TaxBandits, we can also offer you paper and distribution solutions so that you no longer have to risk getting those tax forms lost in the mail. So just a few things to keep in mind, and I do encourage you to log onto our website and see how you can have your tax forms completed in minutes by just signing up with us with TaxBandits.com. And of course, that's all free up until the transmittal. Now I'd like to go ahead and open the floor to any questions that you may have regarding the information that we've discussed today, or perhaps the services that TaxBandits offers. So let's go ahead and take a look if we have any questions that were sent during the webinar.
Okay. Yeah, all right, so we do have a few. The first one comes from Cynthia, and she's asking, will you help determine ACA eligibility or not for my employees?
So when it comes to ACA, we unfortunately do not, under TaxBandits, determine eligibility. Since the service that we offer through TaxBandits is a sort of do-it-yourself program, you would need to have that information already ready for filing. But we do have a full-service option for ACA. And I'd love to send you a little bit more information about that. If you just chat in your contact information, I can send you more information about a full service solution. But good question.
Okay. If I end up needing to file an 8809 extension this year, how can I get it so that I can send my contractors their forms in March? And this comes from Ryan.
Okay. Ryan, that one's a little bit of a tricky one. Because unfortunately you would need to request an extension separately. Again, you can no longer e-file an extension of time to distribute your forms. You can try mailing in a letter to the IRS requesting an extension, but again, if you go ahead and do that, you would need to state a reason for the delay, and it is not an automatic guarantee. But if you are accepted, then you will be given between 15 to 30 days to get your forms out, depending on what the IRS decides. But it's just not a guarantee that you'll be able to get an extension on that.
Okay, it looks like we have one last question coming from Trent. And he asks, since you have the W-2 and 941 forms, do you support any other payroll tax forms?
Yes, we do. So as I previously mentioned in the webinar, we do offer 940 filings, and we're always looking to add more forms. We currently have a handful in the pipeline, but our larger parent company has really identified a need in the payroll industry. So we actually just launched a new sister product called PayWow late 2017. And so with PayWow, you'll be able to manage your payroll as well as file payroll-related tax forms. So that might be something to look into if payroll seems to be a need for you. But I'd be happy again to send over more information about their payroll product and services if you just go ahead and chat in your contact information.
All right,
Any other questions?
Oh,
No?
that is all the questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us again for this webinar, Year-End Tax Review. I do hope that you guys found it helpful. If you have any other questions that follow the webinar or would like more information, please feel free to contact us. But otherwise, until next time, thank you guys so much.
Thanks.